My children would lock me in my bedroom when visitors came. The old lady's lost her mind, they'd say. But my womb held the proof of what they did to me every night, a miracle that became their greatest condemnation. Hello to all of you wonderful folks watching today. What a blessing to be able to come into your homes, even if it's just through this screen. My name is Eleanor Foster. I'm 67 years old now, and I live in this peaceful little town called Millbrook in rural Virginia. It's not where I was born, but it's where I found peace after everything I went through. Oh, before I continue my story, I'd like to ask those of you watching now, if you enjoy what you're hearing, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It means so much to this grandma to be able to share her stories with more people. And tell me in the comments, what town are you watching from? And what time of day did you find this video? Morning with your coffee, after lunch, or late in the evening? I always read all the comments, and I'm so happy to know where you're from and when you take time out of your day to listen to this grandma's stories. Let me know, okay? Let's create a circle of kindness. Today, I'm going to tell you a difficult story, but one that needs to be told. About how God sometimes uses mysterious ways to bring justice to this world. I'll talk about pain, about the evil that can exist even inside a home, but also about a miracle that changed everything in my life. A miracle that doctors couldn't explain, but that for me was the salvation I didn't even know I needed. This story begins a few years ago when I had just become a widow and my 5 grown sons were still living with me in our old house. I was born in Pineville, a small place also in Virginia, in 1958. Back then, life was very different from today. My father, Nicholas Foster, worked on a farm, growing corn, beans, and wheat. A strong man, a man of few words, but who never let us go hungry. My mother, Julia Foster, was a seamstress and the midwife for the area. Every woman about to have a baby would send for my mother, no matter the time of day or night. Our house was simple, with a dirt floor and covered with wooden shingles. It had only 3 rooms: the living room, which also served as a bedroom for my parents, the room where we children slept, and the kitchen with a wood stove that stayed lit all day. In the backyard, we had a well that never dried up, even in the worst droughts. That's where we got water for drinking, cooking, and bathing. There were 5 of us siblings, me, the oldest, then Albert, Nathan, Irene, and George, the baby. We grew up together, playing tag, hide and seek, making dolls from corn husks and toy cars from tin cans. Life was simple, but I was happy. I loved helping my mother care for the younger ones, especially George, who was the darling of the house. My day would start very early. Before the sun even appeared, I was already up to fetch water from the well. Then I helped light the fire to make coffee. While my mother kneaded the dough for biscuits, I swept the yard. Soon after, we would all go to school, which was about 2 miles from home. We walked there, along a red dirt road that, during the rainy season, turned into quite a muddy mess. The school was just 1 room with students of all ages together. The teacher, Miss Caroline, was strict but fair. She was the one who taught me to read and write, something my parents never had the opportunity to learn. I loved books, even though we had so few of them. I read everything that fell into my hands: almanacs, comic books, even product labels. On Sunday afternoons, after service at St. Joseph's Church, our patron saint, the whole family would gather under the oak tree that stood in the center of the square. There, families would meet, children would play, and the old folks would tell stories about the old days. It was also there that the summer festivals happened, with bonfires, square dancing, and lots of good food: cornbread, apple pie, roasted corn, sweet potato pie, and cornmeal cake. I had an inseparable friend, Beatrice. We were like sisters. We played together, went to school together, dreamed together. She wanted to be a teacher, and I, a nurse. We made plans to one day leave that little place, see the city, study. But not everything was rosy in my childhood. When I was about 10 years old, I began to notice something strange in the way my Uncle Arthur, my father's brother, looked at me. He lived in the house next door and was always showing up at our place uninvited. When he arrived, my mother would get tense, and I noticed she always found a way to keep me away from him. Once, I heard my mother arguing with my father. "You need to talk to your brother, Nicholas. I don't like the way he looks at the girl." My father never said anything, perhaps out of respect for his older brother, perhaps because he didn't believe there could be any evil there. But my mother, she protected me like a lioness. She never left me alone when he was around, and if she needed to go out, she took me with her, or asked my Aunt Eunice, Uncle Arthur's wife, to stay with me. It was during this time that I also met Thomas, a boy 2 years older than me, son of the general store owner. He always secretly gave me a lollipop when I went to buy something for my mother. He was a handsome and kind boy, and all the girls at school were in love with him. Secretly, I was too. When I turned 12, my mother taught me to embroider. We would spend hours together, she showing me the stitches, telling stories of when she was young. It was also during this time that I learned from her about healing plants. Whenever someone in the family got sick, she knew exactly which leaf to use, how to make the tea, how long to let it steep. I watched it all with fascination. Life followed its quiet course in Pineville, between work on the farm, classes at the little school, Sunday services, and community festivals. I grew up healthy and protected, surrounded by the love of my family and friends, never imagining the trials that the future held for me. How could I have known, in that time of innocence, that years later I would face such darkness within my own home? At 15, my life began to change. Beatrice, my childhood friend, moved away to Richmond with her family. I was devastated, as it was like losing a sister. That same year, my mother discovered a lump in her breast. It wasn't long before she began to waste away. The herbs she herself had taught me to prepare could no longer ease her pains. "Eleanor, my girl, you're going to have to be strong," she would tell me on nights when we stayed awake because she couldn't sleep from so much pain. "Take care of your siblings, especially Irene. A woman in this world needs protection." Mama passed away on a rainy dawn in November 1974. I had just turned 16. My father, who was never one to show his feelings, became even more silent. He would leave before sunrise and only return when it was already night. It fell to me to take on the role of homemaker, caring for my siblings, cooking, washing, sewing. It was during this time that Thomas, that boy from the general store, began to court me openly. He was already 18, working with his father in the business, and had good intentions. He would come to talk to me in the late afternoon when I was hanging clothes on the line. He brought small gifts, a ribbon for my hair, a little candy, sometimes even a pretty piece of fabric left over from the store. "You deserve better, Eleanor," he would tell me. "A talented girl like you shouldn't be working herself to the bone. If you married me, you'd have a more peaceful life." The problem was that my father depended on me. My siblings were still young, especially George, who was only 8 years old. How could I abandon them? Besides, there was something about Thomas that bothered me. Behind that gentle smile and sweet words, I sensed a certain possessiveness. He didn't like it when I talked to other boys after church, and he always questioned where I was going when he saw me on the street. Around this same time, my Uncle Arthur became a widower. Aunt Eunice died of a sudden fever, leaving my uncle alone in that big house next to ours. Soon he began to frequent our house more often, coming for dinner almost every day. "He's family," my father would say. "We can't leave him alone at such a difficult time." But I still remembered those looks from when I was a child and how my mother protected me. Now, without her, I felt vulnerable. One night, as I was washing dishes after dinner, he approached from behind me. "You've grown, Eleanor," he said softly. "You're almost like your mother when she was young." His breath smelled of whiskey, and his hands tried to touch my waist. I quickly moved away, dropping a plate that shattered on the floor. "What's happening here?" My father appeared in the kitchen doorway, looking at the scene. "Nothing, Nicholas," my uncle answered, moving away. "The girl is clumsy, that's all." That night, I couldn't sleep. I locked the door to the room I shared with Irene and spent hours looking at the wooden ceiling, thinking about what to do. The next day, I sought out Thomas and accepted his marriage proposal. We got married 3 months later in a simple ceremony at St. Joseph's Church. I was 17, he was 19. I went to live in the house behind the general store, which belonged to his family. At first, it seemed I had made the right decision. Thomas was hard-working, didn't drink like my father and uncle, and gave me a comfortable life. My father came to say goodbye on my wedding day, with tears in his eyes, the only time I ever saw him almost cry. "You're just like your mother, daughter," he said. "You have the same good heart. May God bless you in this new life." I soon became pregnant with our first son, Robert, who was born in 1976. Then came Joseph, Clark, Edward, and Jerome, one after the other. 5 sons, all resembling their father, with the same long nose and thick eyebrows of the Perrys. It was when Jerome, my youngest, was only 1 year old that I began to notice changes in Thomas's behavior. He started to complain about everything: the food I made, the way I kept the house, how I raised the boys. Nothing was good enough. At night, when the boys were asleep, he would seek me out in the bedroom not with affection, but with a brutal urgency that hurt me. If I tried to refuse, he would become furious. "You're my wife," he would say through clenched teeth. "You have an obligation to serve me." The years passed, and the situation got worse. Thomas started drinking, first only on weekends, then almost every day. The store, which was prosperous, began to fail. Suppliers stopped delivering merchandise because he wasn't paying the bills. He blamed everyone but himself: the government, competitors, the economic crisis, even me and the boys, who, according to him, ate too much. Our sons grew up in this environment. Robert, the oldest, soon learned from his father to treat me harshly. By the time he was 15, he had the same authoritarian manner as his father, giving orders to his brothers, and even to me. Joseph and Clark followed the same path. Only Edward and Jerome, the youngest, still showed some affection for me when their father wasn't looking. On a stormy afternoon in 1995, as I struggled to save what I could from our garden that was being washed away by the flood, I slipped and fell in the mud. Thomas, who was watching from the porch with a bottle of whiskey in his hand, burst into laughter. "Looks like a sow wallowing in the mud," he said, and the older boys laughed along with him. In that moment, I felt something break inside me. I was no longer the same girl who left home to escape her uncle. I was 37, with 5 sons, and a life that looked nothing like what I had once dreamed. But what could I do? Where would I go with 5 boys? How would I support them? "Mom, are you okay?" It was Jerome, only 9 years old, who came to help me up, offering his small hand while the others continued laughing. "Yes, my son," I answered, cleaning the mud from my hands. "Your mother is strong like an oak tree. It may bend, but it doesn't break." That night, while everyone slept, I took the rosary that had belonged to my mother and prayed, asking for strength to endure and to protect at least my youngest sons from the brutality that seemed to be infecting our home. What I didn't imagine was that the worst was yet to come. Years later, when Thomas had his first stroke, our lives would change completely, and I would discover what it means to be truly at the mercy of the sons I had raised. Thomas's first stroke happened in 2018. He was 62 and I was 60. Our sons were all adults now. Robert at 42, Joseph at 40, Clark at 38, Edward at 35, and Jerome, the youngest, at 32. All of them, except for Jerome, who had moved to Charlottesville, still lived with us in the house behind what had once been the family's general store, now closed for years. That morning, I found Thomas fallen in the bathroom. His face was twisted on one side, and he couldn't speak properly. I called the boys, and Clark, who had an old car, took him to the hospital in Pineville. The doctor said he would need to go to a larger hospital in Roanoke, and that's where we headed. Thomas stayed in the hospital for almost a month. When he returned home, he was no longer the same man. Half of his body didn't respond, he could barely speak, and he needed help with everything: eating, dressing, bathing. From an authoritarian man who ruled the house with an iron fist, he transformed into someone completely dependent. I thought I would finally have peace. What a mistake that was. I soon discovered I had only traded one tormentor for several. "You did this on purpose, didn't you?" Robert accused me one night after I had helped Thomas eat. Put too much salt in his food for years, knowing he had high blood pressure. I was shocked by the accusation. How could my own son think something like that about me? "That's absurd, my son. I would never do such a thing." "Shut up, you lying old woman," he shouted, banging on the table. "We know very well that you never liked Dad. Now he's like this, and you're taking your revenge." From that day on, my true Calvary began. My older sons, Robert, Joseph, and Clark, formed a kind of tribunal against me. Everything was my fault. If the food got cold before serving Thomas, if his diaper wasn't changed on time, if he had a fever or any discomfort. They began to control everything. The money from Thomas's small pension, what I could or couldn't buy for the house, even the hours I could go out to church or to the market. Edward, who was always more quiet, just watched, neither defending me nor actively participating in that persecution. One afternoon, as I was sweeping the yard, Joseph arrived drunk, staggering. He came towards me with his finger pointed. "You're no good. You never were. Dad got sick from putting up with you." I tried to go into the house to protect myself, but he followed me to the kitchen. There, cornered between the stove and the sink, I felt his sour whiskey breath as he yelled inches from my face. Suddenly, he grabbed my arm forcefully, leaving purple marks on my already flaccid skin from age. "Joseph, let me go. You're hurting me," I begged. "You deserve more than this," he said, with a look I had never seen before. A look that froze my soul. That night, I locked myself in the small room where I slept, alone since Thomas had fallen ill, and the boys had arranged a room just for him, with a rented hospital bed. I cried until I fell asleep, thinking of my mother, of how she would have faced a situation like this. The weeks passed, and the situation only got worse. The boys started locking me in my room when visitors came. "The old lady's lost her mind," they would say. "She badmouths Dad to everyone. It's better to keep her quiet in her room." I heard everything through the thin wooden door. I heard when they made up stories about me, saying I mistreated Thomas, that I was ungrateful after everything he had done for me and the boys. People believed them, of course. They were adult men, workers. Who would believe an old woman? At first, I tried to call Jerome in Charlottesville. He was always the most sensible of my sons. But the brothers found out and took away my old cell phone, my only contact with the outside world. "Making up lies to Jerome too? Trying to turn our brother against us?" Clark shouted, smashing my cell phone against the wall. I began to feel like a prisoner in my own home. During the day, when they went out to work, I would care for Thomas as I always did. I would bathe him, change his diapers, prepare his meals, give him his medicines at the right times. At night, when they returned, usually drunk like their father used to be, I would retreat to my room, locking the door if I managed to get there before them. But I didn't always manage to. One night, about 6 months after Thomas's stroke, I woke up startled by someone entering my room. It was Robert. I could smell the whiskey emanating from him even in the dark. "Mom," he said with a different voice, almost sweet, but which caused me more fear than when he yelled. "You're very lonely, aren't you? Since Dad got sick." I sat up in bed, pulling the sheet up to my neck, feeling a dread I had never felt before. "Robert, my son, go to sleep. You're drunk." He sat on the edge of my bed, and his hand reached for my face in a touch that should have been affectionate, but which caused me revulsion. "You're still a beautiful woman, you know," he murmured. I won't describe what happened next. I'll just say that that night, my own son, flesh of my flesh, did to me what not even my husband in his worst days had done. And it wasn't just once. In the following weeks, it wasn't just Robert. Joseph and Clark also started coming into my room on nights when they returned intoxicated. Sometimes it was one of them, other times more than one. I felt I was living a nightmare from which I couldn't wake up. My only company in those dark days was a neighbor, Mrs. Lucy, an older lady than me, who sometimes came to see how Thomas was doing. She seemed to suspect something was wrong, by my eyes always swollen from crying, by the marks on my arms, by my body growing thinner from not being able to eat. "Mrs. Eleanor," she asked me one day, when we managed to be alone for a few minutes while I was hanging clothes on the line, "are you in need of help? Can I call someone?" I opened my mouth to speak, to cry for help, but at that moment Clark appeared in the yard. "What are you doing here, Mrs. Lucy?" he asked with false cordiality. "You know Mom's not doing well in the head. Let's go inside. I'll take care of her." From that day on, I didn't see Mrs. Lucy anymore. I found out later that the boys had spread around the neighborhood that I had dementia, that I sometimes became aggressive, and that it was better for no one to show up without warning. I no longer had hope that this hell would end. I prayed every night, asking God to take Thomas so that perhaps my sons would move out and I could, finally, have some peace. Or to take me, to end that suffering. I would cry softly into the pillow so no one would hear me, fearing that any sign of weakness could trigger more violence. It was on one of these dark days, when it was completing a year since Thomas's stroke, that I began to feel strange. I had strong nausea, especially in the morning. My body, which hadn't menstruated for years, seemed swollen and painful. At first I thought it was just the result of stress, poor diet, sleepless nights, but something inside me knew it was more than that. "Lord," I prayed, kneeling beside my bed, "if what I'm thinking is true, I don't know if it's a blessing or a curse, but thy will be done." The symptoms continued, and I could no longer deny what was happening to my body. At 61 years old, something that should be impossible seemed to be becoming reality. One morning, while bathing Thomas, I fainted. It was Edward who found me fallen in the bathroom. "Mom! Mom, wake up!" He shook me, with a genuine concern that I hadn't seen in the eyes of my sons for a long time. When I came to, he helped me sit in the kitchen chair and brought me a glass of water. "You need to see a doctor," he said softly. "You're very pale, very thin." "Your brothers won't let me," I replied, with a weak voice. Edward was silent for a moment, looking around as if fearing someone might be listening. "I'll take you secretly," he whispered. "Tomorrow morning, when they leave for work." That night, I couldn't sleep. A glimmer of hope lit up inside me. Maybe Edward was different from his brothers. Maybe, through him, I could find a way out of that hell. The next morning, as promised, he borrowed a car from a friend and took me to the hospital in Pineville. I lied to the nurse, saying I had stomach problems. I couldn't reveal my true suspicion. It was too absurd, too impossible for a woman my age. The doctor who attended me, Dr. August, was young, recently graduated, with kind eyes behind his glasses. He examined me carefully, asked questions about my diet, about how I was feeling. "Mrs. Eleanor," he said, noting something on a form, "I'm going to order some blood tests. You're very anemic. We need to find out why." When the nurse left to prepare for the blood collection, I gathered courage. "Doctor," I said, with a trembling voice, I think I might be pregnant." He looked at me with an expression that mixed surprise and skepticism. "Mrs. Eleanor, with all due respect, you are 61 years old. I haven't menstruated for more than 10 years. He smiled gently, as one smiles at a child who says something innocent. "It's practically impossible, Mrs. Eleanor, but we'll include that test too, just to set your mind at ease." I did the tests and returned home with Edward, who waited anxiously in the hospital corridor. "What did the doctor say, Mom?" "That it could be anemia. We'll wait for the test results." 3 days later, we received a call from the hospital. Dr. August wanted to see me urgently. Edward made up a story for his brothers that he was taking me to buy medicines for Thomas in the neighboring town, and so we managed to return to the hospital. When we entered the office, I noticed that Dr. August was not alone. There was an older female doctor with him, Dr. Victoria, who introduced herself as a gynecologist. "Mrs. Eleanor," Dr. August began, with a serious expression, "the results of your tests have arrived, and, well, you were right." I felt the ground disappear beneath my feet. "Right about what?" asked Edward, confused. Dr. August looked at me, silently asking for permission to speak. I nodded. "Your mother is pregnant." Edward's face went pale. He grabbed the edge of the table for support. "That's impossible," he murmured. "My father has been bedridden for over a year. He can't even—" His voice disappeared as he realized the implication of what he was saying. I saw the understanding dawn in his eyes, followed by an expression of absolute horror. "Mom," he whispered. "Who?" I couldn't answer. Tears were streaming down my wrinkled face. Dr. August and Dr. Victoria exchanged concerned looks. "Mrs. Eleanor," Dr. Victoria spoke with gentleness. "It's all right. You don't need to talk about this now if you don't want to. But you need to know that this is a very high-risk pregnancy due to your age. We need to discuss all the possibilities." "What possibilities?" I asked, wiping away tears. "Well, there are significant risks for you and the baby. We could consider terminating the pregnancy for medical reasons. It's a procedure that—" "No," I interrupted firmly. "I won't do that." Dr. Victoria nodded, respecting my decision. "In that case, we'll need to monitor you very closely. Frequent exams, rest, careful diet." While she talked about the necessary care, my mind was elsewhere. How would I tell my other sons? What would happen when they found out? And who was the father? Robert, Joseph, Clark, or all of them? We left the hospital in silence. Edward drove with his eyes fixed on the road, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles were white. "Mom," he finally spoke when we stopped in front of our house. "You can't go back there." "Where would I go, my son? I have no one. I have no money." "I have a friend in Millbrook who can take you in for a while. I'll figure something out." "And your father? And your brothers?" "My brothers." He stopped, and I saw tears in his eyes. "What did they do to you, Mom? How could they?" That night, while Edward went out to call his friend in Millbrook, the moment that served as the last straw happened. I was in the kitchen preparing tea for myself when Robert entered, already intoxicated as usual. He closed the door behind him and came towards me. "I heard you went to the doctor today," he said with a slurred voice. "What did the old lady go there for? To complain about us? To say that her sons mistreat her?" "No, my son," I replied, trying to stay calm. "I just went to get medicine for your father." "Liar!" he shouted, punching the table. "I saw Edward talking to someone on the phone. You're plotting something." He advanced towards me, grabbing my arm forcefully. Instinctively, I placed my hand over my stomach in a protective gesture. It was a mistake. Robert noticed the movement and his eyes narrowed. "What was that?" he asked, looking at my stomach and then at my face. "What are you hiding?" "Nothing, my son," I replied, trying to break free. He held tighter, shaking me. "Are you sick? Going to die and leave us to deal with Dad?" "Let me go, Robert. You're hurting your mother." He pushed me against the wall, and I felt a sharp pain in my belly. At that moment, something inside me exploded, not just pain, but a fury I had never felt before. It was no longer just for myself that I had to survive, but for that life inside me, impossible as it might be. "Enough!" I shouted with a strength I didn't know I had. "Enough! You've already taken everything from me. My dignity, my respect, my will to live. But you won't take this from me." Robert backed away, surprised by my reaction. "What are you talking about, you crazy old woman?" "I'm pregnant." The words left my mouth before I could contain them. Pregnant. And do you know who the father is? One of you, or all of you, my own sons. May God forgive me for having brought you into the world. Robert's face transformed into a mask of anger and fear. He raised his hand to hit me, but at that moment the kitchen door opened. It was Edward. "Don't touch her!" he shouted, pushing his brother away from me. The two brothers grappled with each other. I heard the noise attract the others. Soon Joseph and Clark were there too, and the kitchen turned into an arena of shouts, accusations, and punches. "She's pregnant," Robert was shouting. "The old woman is pregnant." I saw the horror in all their eyes when the understanding of what that meant spread. The truth that no one dared speak aloud was now exposed, raw and brutal. I took advantage of the confusion to run to my room. I locked the door and pushed the dresser against it. I could hear the fight continuing outside, furniture being broken, shouts, insults. I sat on the edge of the bed, trembling uncontrollably. My world was falling apart, but inside me, a new life, an impossible one, was growing. And somehow, this impossible would be my salvation. Hours later, when the house finally quieted, I heard a soft knock on the door. "Mom," it was Edward's voice, "open the door. We're alone. We have to leave here now." That same night, I left home with only a bag containing some clothes, my documents, and my mother's rosary. Edward took me in his friend's car to the bus station in Roanoke. During the journey, we talked in low voices, as if we feared someone might hear us, even inside the car. "Mom, I'm so sorry," he said with a choked voice. "I should have done something sooner." "Don't blame yourself, my son," I replied, squeezing his hand. "You're doing it now, and that's what matters." At the bus station, Edward bought a ticket for me on the bus that would leave in an hour for Millbrook. He handed me an envelope with all the money he had managed to gather. "It's not much, Mom, but it will help until you get settled. My friend Walter will be waiting at the Millbrook bus station. He's a nurse at the hospital there and is already informed about your condition. And your father? And your brothers? Don't worry about that now. I'll say you ran away, that we don't know where you went. They'll be furious, but what can they do? As for Dad, I'll take care of him until we resolve all this." We hugged for a long time before I boarded the bus. It was the first time in years that I felt safe in someone's arms. "I'll call Walter every day to check on you," he promised. "As soon as I can, I'll visit you." The journey to Millbrook took almost 6 hours. I spent much of the time looking out the window, watching the Virginia countryside pass by, thinking about how my life had taken so many turns to bring me here. Occasionally, I would place my hand on my still flat stomach, amazed and frightened by what was growing inside me. As promised, Walter was waiting at the bus station when I arrived, late at night. He was a middle-aged man with a kind face that immediately inspired confidence. "Mrs. Eleanor?" he approached as soon as I got off the bus. "I'm Walter, your son Edward's friend. Welcome to Millbrook." He took me to his house, where his wife, Ellen, received me with a warm hug and a bowl of hot soup. They had prepared a simple little room for me, with a clean bed and a small vase of flowers on the bedside table. For the first time in a long time, I slept without fear. The next day, Walter took me to the hospital where he worked. He had spoken with Dr. Anthony, a specialist in high-risk pregnancies. "Mrs. Eleanor," said Dr. Anthony after examining me, "your pregnancy is indeed extremely rare, 1 in millions. We're going to need to monitor you closely with weekly consultations and many tests. You understand the risks, don't you?" "Yes, doctor," I replied, "but this baby is my chance to start over. I'll do whatever is necessary." In the following weeks, I established a routine in Millbrook. I lived with Walter and Ellen, who became my guardian angels. Edward called almost every day on Walter's cell phone, giving news and receiving updates about my health. "The boys are furious, Mom," he told me in one of these calls. "They went to the police station to report your disappearance, but I think it's just to keep up appearances. Deep down, they're afraid. afraid of what you might tell, of what might happen if the truth comes out. My pregnancy progressed, with all the necessary care. Due to my advanced age and the high-risk situation, the entire hospital seemed involved in my case. Doctors held frequent meetings to discuss my condition, nurses took turns accompanying me, and even the hospital director occasionally appeared to check on how I was doing. In the 5th month, when my belly was already becoming visible, I received news that changed everything again. "Mrs. Eleanor," Dr. Anthony called me after a routine consultation. "We need to talk about something important." He led me to a small meeting room where Walter, Dr. Gary, who was a medical examiner, and a woman who introduced herself as Dr. Helen, a district attorney, were already waiting. "Mrs. Eleanor," Dr. Helen began, "Walter and Dr. Anthony sought me out because they are concerned about your situation. They told me the little they know about the circumstances that brought you here. I would like to hear your story if you feel comfortable." I took a deep breath and for the first time told everything. From Thomas's stroke, through the abuses by my sons, to the discovery of the pregnancy and my escape. I couldn't hold back tears at several moments, but I felt that each word that came out was one less weight on my shoulders. When I finished, there was a heavy silence in the room. Dr. Gary was discreetly wiping his eyes, Walter was looking at the floor, and the district attorney was making notes with a serious expression. "Mrs. Eleanor," Dr. Helen finally said, "what happened to you is a very serious crime. Your sons need to answer for this. Would you be willing to give an official statement?" I hesitated for a moment. They were my sons, after all, flesh of my flesh. But then I remembered the nights of terror, the contempt, the cruelty. "Yes," I answered, placing my hand on my belly. "For me and for this child." The following months were intense. The Millbrook police got in touch with the Pineville Police Department. Statements were taken, including from Edward, who confirmed everything I had said. Thomas, who was already in very poor health, was taken to a nursing home in Roanoke under state care. Robert, Joseph, and Clark were detained for investigation. At first, they denied everything, calling me crazy, a liar, saying it was impossible for me to be pregnant at my age, that it was all an invention by me and Edward to get revenge on them. But there was one fact that couldn't be denied: my pregnancy. A 61-year-old woman with no relations with her husband for over a year, a bedridden husband incapable of moving. How to explain? The only possible explanation was the one they were trying at all costs to deny. In the 8th month of pregnancy, when I was already huge and moved with difficulty, my blood pressure rose dangerously. The doctors decided to perform an emergency C-section. "It's too risky to wait any longer," explained Dr. Anthony, "both for you and for the baby." The surgery was performed with a complete team. Besides the obstetrician, there were 2 anesthesiologists, a cardiologist, a neonatologist, and several nurses. The whole hospital seemed to be on alert. After all, it wasn't every day that a woman over 60 gave birth. When I woke up from the anesthesia, the first person I saw was Ellen, holding a small bundle in her arms. "Mrs. Eleanor," she said, with tears in her eyes, "it's a girl. A beautiful, healthy girl." They placed my daughter in my arms, and I felt a love so great it barely fit in my chest. She was small, but perfect. Her little eyes opened for an instant, as if wanting to meet me, before closing again for sleep. "What will you name her?" asked Ellen. "Hope," I replied without hesitation, because that's what she brought back to me. 2 days after Hope's birth, Dr. Gary entered my hospital room accompanied by District Attorney Helen. "Mrs. Eleanor," he said, with an expression that mixed satisfaction and sorrow, "the DNA test results have arrived." The hospital had collected genetic material from little Hope right after her birth. The justice system, in turn, had ordered DNA collection from my 3 older sons. "The test confirmed," continued Dr. Gary, "Robert is the biological father of the child." I closed my eyes, letting the tears flow. They weren't tears of sadness or anger, but of relief. Finally, there was irrefutable proof that no one could contest. "What happens now?" I asked the district attorney. "Now they will be formally charged and tried. The DNA is just part of the evidence. We also have the testimonies from you, from Edward, from Walter, from the doctors who attended you in Pineville. Your case is strong, Mrs. Eleanor. They will not go unpunished." And indeed, they didn't. The trial took place 6 months after Hope's birth. It was a difficult, painful process. I had to relive everything, tell details I'd rather forget. But with each word spoken, I felt I was freeing myself, that I was doing justice not just for myself, but for all women who have gone through similar situations and never had a voice. Robert, Joseph, and Clark were sentenced to many years in prison. Edward was absolved of any accusation, having been recognized as a fundamental piece in my rescue. Thomas died in the nursing home before the trial even ended, never knowing the extent of the horror that happened in his own house. When it was all over, Edward came to visit me in Millbrook. He brought documents from the sale of the house in Pineville. "It's not much money, Mom, but it's yours by right," he said, handing me an envelope. "To help raise Hope." "And you, my son? What will you do now?" "I'm going to Charlottesville, to be near Jerome." He was devastated when he found out everything. He blames himself for not having noticed, for not having been present. But he's also happy to know that you're well, that you have hope now. Edward knelt before me, holding my wrinkled hands. "Do you forgive me, Mom, for not having done anything sooner, for having allowed all that to happen?" "My son," I replied, touching his face. "You saved me. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't be here today, with my daughter. There's nothing to forgive." Walter and Ellen offered for me to continue living with them, but I felt I needed a place of my own. With the money from the sale of the house, I managed to rent a simple little house on the outskirts of Millbrook, with a yard where I could plant my herbs and raise my daughter in peace. At first, it was difficult. A woman over 60, raising a newborn, still recovering from everything I had been through. But the Millbrook community welcomed me as one of their own. Neighbors would appear with food, clothes for Hope, offering help to care for her when I needed to rest. Gradually, I grew stronger. Money was tight, but enough to live simply. I began to cultivate my medicinal herbs in the yard, as I had learned from my mother so many years ago. Soon I was making teas, ointments, syrups that I sold at the town's farmer's market. It wasn't much, but it complemented the small pension I got after the whole judicial process. Jerome and Edward came to visit me regularly, bringing gifts for their little sister. They were the only ties I maintained with my past, with the family I had before. They adored Hope, and she grew up knowing she had 2 brothers who loved her. The greatest miracle of all was seeing how Hope brought healing to my life. Each of her smiles, each new discovery, each word learned was a reminder that life always finds a way, even in the most unlikely places. One day, when Hope was almost 2 years old, I received an unexpected visit. It was Dr. Anthony, the obstetrician who had cared for me during my pregnancy. "I came to see how my most special patients are doing," he said, smiling as he watched Hope running around the yard. We had coffee on the porch, observing my daughter playing with the butterflies that landed on the flowers. "You know, Mrs. Eleanor," he commented, "in all my years of medicine, I've never seen anything like your case." From a scientific point of view, it was practically impossible. A woman your age, who hadn't menstruated for years, medical books would say it was impossible. "And what do you think, doctor?" He was silent for a moment, observing Hope. "I think there are things that science still doesn't completely explain. Some would call it a miracle." "It was a miracle, doctor," I replied. "A miracle that saved me from hell and brought me to a new life. God works in mysterious ways." "Be that as it may," he said, getting up to leave. "I'm happy that you and Hope are well. Stay that way." As I watched the doctor walk away, I thought about how life takes turns. What my sons did to me out of malice ended up being, ironically, what freed me from them. The irrefutable proof of the DNA, the pregnancy that no one could explain in any other way, was what ensured that justice was done. Hope came to me, offering a little flower she had picked. I took her in my arms, feeling her warm little body against mine, her child's scent, her innocent laugh. In that moment, I fully understood the meaning of the name I had chosen for her. She was my hope, my fresh start, my living proof that it's never too late for a new chance. Today, here in Millbrook, my life is very different from the one I had for so many years. I am 67 years old, while my little Hope is already 5, about to turn 6. People who see me with her on the street sometimes think I'm the grandmother, and I don't mind explaining that I'm the mother. Each time I say this, it's like reaffirming the miracle that happened in my life. Our little house is simple, but cozy. We have 2 bedrooms, mine and hers, decorated with drawings that she makes herself and hangs on the walls. The small living room has a bookshelf with children's books that Edward and Jerome always bring when they visit us. The kitchen is my favorite territory, besides the yard, of course. It's there that I prepare meals for the 2 of us, always including fresh herbs that I grow. The yard has transformed into my little paradise. I started with few seedlings, as I told you, but today I have more than 30 different types of medicinal plants. Each bed is carefully organized and identified with small signs that Hope helped make, even though she still can't read properly. She already knows many plants by smell and appearance. This is mint, Mom. This is the one that cures stomach aches, right? My routine is peaceful and happy. I wake up early, even before the sun rises. I make coffee, pray my rosary thanking for another day, and go tend to the plants while the house is still silent. When Hope wakes up, I'm usually returning from the yard with some fresh herb for the morning tea. On weekdays, I take her to the county elementary school that's 2 blocks from home. The principal, Mrs. Marilyn, knows my story and has always been very welcoming to us. Afterwards, I go to the town's farmer's market, where I have a small stand where I sell my herbs, teas, tonics, and ointments. I don't earn much, but it nicely complements the pension I receive. The people here respect me. At first, when we arrived, there were whispers, curious looks. An elderly lady with a newborn baby, no husband around, gave people something to talk about. But gradually my story became known, and instead of judgment, I received acceptance. Today I'm known as Herb Eleanor, and many people seek me out to ask advice about natural remedies. In the afternoons, after I pick up Hope from school, we usually sit on the porch. While I do my embroidery, another knowledge I inherited from my mother and that I now teach to my daughter, Hope draws or plays with the dolls she makes herself from cloth, as I did in my childhood. On Saturdays, we go to the big Millbrook Farmers Market. Hope loves to walk among the stalls, see the colorful fruits, hear the vendors announcing their products. We always stop to have some apple cider and buy a piece of maple candy, which is her favorite treat. On Sundays, we go to service at the Methodist Church. We always sit on the same pew, near the altar of the Virgin Mary. Afterwards, we walk to the central square, where Hope plays with other children while I chat with other mothers and grandmothers. These are simple moments, but they fill me with gratitude. Edward and Jerome come to visit us at least once a month. Jerome got married 2 years ago to a very nice young woman named Susan, and they are expecting their first child. Edward remains single, dedicated to his work as a mechanic in Charlottesville. Both are Hope's godfathers and spoil her as if they were her fathers. When they arrive, our house fills with laughter and joy. About my other sons, I rarely speak of them. They are serving their sentences, and although I have forgiven them, because holding grudges only hurts oneself, I prefer not to maintain contact. Some ghosts are better left resting. One of the greatest joys of my current life is seeing Hope growing up healthy and happy. She's a smart, talkative girl, full of energy. Her eyes shine with curiosity, and she's always asking questions about everything. Why is the sky blue, Mom? Where does the moon go when it's day? How do plants know they have to grow upward? Sometimes, when she sleeps, I watch her peaceful little face and wonder about the future. I know I won't be here to see her graduate, marry, have her own children. I'm aware of my age, but it doesn't sadden me. I feel I've lived enough to learn that life is made of cycles, of comings and goings, of losses and gains. What comforts me is knowing that I'm raising a strong girl who will know her story one day, when the time is right, and will understand that even from the most difficult situations, something beautiful can be born. Edward and Jerome have promised to take care of her if I leave before my time. I trust them. Nights are my favorite time. After Hope falls asleep, I sit on the porch with a cup of chamomile and lemon balm tea. I stay there, listening to the crickets, looking at the stars, feeling the fresh breeze that comes down from the hills. In these moments, I silently converse with my mother, with God, thanking for the path that brought me here. I don't have luxuries, I don't have material riches. My house is simple, my clothes are modest, my furniture is sparse and old. But I have something that for many years I thought I had lost forever. I have peace, peace of mind, peace in my heart, peace in my soul. Life has taught me that it doesn't matter how long we are in this world, whether 60, 70, or 100 years. What matters is how we live each day, and today, each day of mine is lived with purpose, with gratitude, and with love. Love for my daughter, for my sons who supported me, for this community that welcomed me, and finally, for myself. That frightened Eleanor, who hid from her sons, who trembled with fear every night, is in the past. Today, I am a woman who rose from the ashes, who found strength where I thought there was nothing left, who discovered that it's never too late to start over. And all this thanks to a miracle called hope. My dear ones who have come this far with me, I want to leave you with some words that life has taught me. Words that cost dearly, that came with tears, with pain, but also with much hope. If you are going through difficult times, if you are trapped in a situation that seems to have no way out, know that there is always a path. Even when all doors seem closed, a window can open. That's how it was for me. When I no longer saw light at the end of the tunnel, when I thought my destiny was to end up in the ruins of that house of horrors, a miracle happened. And miracles can take many forms: a person who extends a hand, an unexpected opportunity, a strength that comes from within us that we didn't even know existed. I learned that our worth doesn't depend on what others say about us. For years, I heard that I was worthless, that I was a burden, that I was too old to start over. I believed those lies for too long. Don't make the same mistake. Your life has value, your story has value, your pain has value. And most importantly, your ability to rise again has immeasurable value. I discovered at 60 that it's never too late to seek help, to say no, to demand respect. Some may say I'm a survivor, but I prefer to see myself as someone who learned to truly live after so long merely existing. Life can begin, or begin again, at any age. The greatest lesson I learned is that our story doesn't need to define us forever. What happened to me was terrible, but it's not all that I am. I am also Hope's mother, I am Herb Eleanor, I am a friend, I am part of this community that welcomed me. We are much more than our traumas, much more than our scars. If you are facing violence, if you are being mistreated by those who should protect you, know that there are people willing to help. Seek local authorities, protection organizations, trusted people. No matter where you are, no matter your age, no matter your situation, there is always someone willing to extend a hand. And perhaps the most difficult first step is believing that you deserve that help, that you deserve a better life. Our children, relatives, partners, they are not our owners. No one has the right to harm us, to humiliate us, to control our lives. This understanding came late for me, but I hope it comes in time for you. And for those who know someone in an abusive situation, don't turn your back. Sometimes a simple "I'm here" can be the beginning of a great change. My son Edward saved me with that gesture. Walter and Ellen welcomed me without knowing me. The Millbrook community gave me a new chance. Small acts of kindness can transform and even save lives. The past cannot be changed, but the future is in our hands. Each day is an opportunity to write a new page. It's never too late to start over, to forgive, especially ourselves, to find peace. As that old saying from the countryside goes, after the strongest storm, the soil becomes more fertile. My most potent herbs grow exactly where there used to be only dry earth. When I look at my daughter Hope, I see living proof that God writes straight with crooked lines. What came from a terrible situation transformed into the greatest blessing of my life. This taught me that sometimes our greatest miracle can come disguised as our greatest trial. My dear ones who are listening to me now, if this account touched your heart, if my story found an echo in yours, please subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell. Do this not just for me, but for all the Eleanors who are still trapped in their houses of horror, who have not yet found their voice. Each subscription is a way of saying that these stories matter, that these lives matter, that no woman, regardless of age, deserves to live in fear and abuse. And before I go, leave in the comments the word rebirth. Only those who watched until the end will understand the profound meaning this word has for me. It's a reminder that just as I was reborn at 60, it's never too late to start over. Do it now. Don't wait even one more minute. May God bless each one of you, and may hope never fade from your hearts, just as it never faded from mine, even in the darkest moments. Tentar novamente. At the open grave of my sister Lucy, my father looked deep into my eyes and said, "Now only you remain." Beside me, my own mother let out a laugh. That's when I realized I was trapped between two monsters. Hello there, dear friends. How wonderful to be here with you this evening. My name is Janet Smith, and I'm 76 years old. I live here in Millfield, Ohio, the same small town where I was born. It's a humble place, but filled with good-hearted people. We're surrounded by rolling green hills, and there's that sweet scent of apple blossoms in the air when spring arrives. These days, what I enjoy most is preparing traditional recipes from our region. I've become something of a guardian of Midwestern cooking around these parts. You know that apple cider with cinnamon that warms your soul on cold days? Or the classic pot roast that brings everyone to the table with smiles? Well, my dears, I spend my days among pots and spices, making dishes my grandmother taught me and others I've learned throughout my life. My passion for cooking came late, you know? Only after I turned 50. Before that, the kitchen was more a place of obligation than pleasure. But when I became a widow, I needed something to fill my days, to give me purpose beyond the sadness. That's when I began reviving old recipes, the ones my great-uncle Gerald taught me back in Riverdale when I was younger. He had a special way of making beef stew with homemade sausage and that secret seasoning only he knew. I'm sitting here now, with my crocheted blanket on my lap and a cup of hot tea beside me. From here, I can see the garden I planted with my own hands. I'm proud of my begonias and the herbs I use in cooking, the basil, the sage, the lemon balm my grandchildren love so much in their tea. The breeze blows gently this time of day, making the clothes on the line dance, as if saying, "Good afternoon, Miss Janet." Oh, and before I continue my story, I'd like to make a special request to all of you watching. Please tell me in the comments, which town are you watching from? And what time of day did you find this video? Early morning with your coffee, during your afternoon rest, or in the evening while preparing dinner? I always read all the comments, and I'm truly happy to know where you're from and when you take a moment to listen to this old Midwestern grandma's stories. Let me know, won't you? Let's create this virtual community together. If you enjoy our conversation, please hit that subscribe button and the bell icon. It helps me so much, you know? It's like you're knocking on my door for coffee, giving me a warm hug, saying, "I want to hear more, Miss Janet." Today I'm going to share a story from my life that I've kept inside for many years. A difficult story, the kind you think 1,000 times before sharing. But I think the time has come, you know? because it might help someone going through something similar. It all started when I was just a girl, still running through the fields of Millfield, never imagining what fate had in store for me and my sister. A story that begins with grief, with a painful goodbye, but ends, thank God, with a new chance. It's about how I lost my sister to the evil hiding inside our own home, and how I almost followed the same path. I'll tell everything with much respect and care because I know there might be children listening. But it's important to talk about this, about how sometimes danger lies where we least expect it, and how a single act of kindness can change an entire life story. I was born in a simple house on the outskirts of Millfield, where the town begins to turn into countryside. It was a wooden house with a porch that creaked when the wind blew hard, a roof that let in leaks on stormy nights, but that still seemed cozy through a child's eyes. We were a family of 4, me, my sister Lucy, my mother Constance, and my father Edward. Ah, my little sister Lucy. She was 3 years younger than me, a girl with a fragile appearance like a fallen bird. She had such fair hair that it looked almost white when the sun hit it, and a sweet smile that could brighten any dark corner of the house. From a young age, Lucy had weak health. She caught colds easily and had that cough that came and wouldn't leave during our harsh winters. I remember seeing her wrapped in blankets even on days that weren't so cold. My mother, Constance, was a quiet woman of few words and even fewer smiles. She spent her days tending to the house, washing clothes in the backyard tub, cooking what we had, which wasn't much. When I think of her now, I always remember her rough hands from so much work, her stooped posture as if carrying an invisible weight on her back, and her eyes that always seemed distant, looking at a place no one else could see. And my father, Edward Smith, was a foreman at a large farm in the region. A tall man, with broad shoulders and heavy hands. He always came home smelling of cattle and whiskey, bringing with him a silence that made the whole house hold its breath. When he entered, it was as if the air became thinner, harder to breathe. He didn't talk much. He preferred gestures to words, and his gestures weren't always kind, especially with my mother and little Lucy. Our routine began early, with the rooster's crow. Lucy and I shared a straw mattress in a small room at the back of the house. We would wake up to my mother's soft call, "Girls, it's time." Before the sun rose, we were already helping with chores, fetching water from the well, feeding the chickens, sweeping the yard. Then I would go to the local school, almost an hour's walk on dirt roads. Lucy rarely went. "She's not healthy enough," my father would say, though I knew it was more because he thought schooling for girls is a waste of time. At school, I was one of those who loved to learn. Teacher Angela said I had a good head for letters. I dreamed of being a teacher someday, having my own classroom, teaching children to read and write. But I kept this dream quietly in my heart, because at home there was no space for dreams like that. When I returned from school, I spent the rest of the day helping my mother and caring for Lucy. We played when there was time, making up stories with the cloth dolls our grandmother had made, or running around the yard chasing butterflies that visited our flowers. Lucy had a special way of seeing beauty in the simplest things, a colorful stone, a differently shaped leaf, the way light came through the cracks in the window in late afternoon. "Look, Janet, it looks like melted gold," she would say, and I could see it too, through her eyes. Weekends were the hardest days. My father stayed home, and tension grew like a storm cloud. He demanded absolute silence for his rest, and any little noise, the shuffle of a slipper on the wooden floor, Lucy's cough, the clink of a dish, could awaken his fury. "Is there no order in this house?" he would shout. And then came the punishment, usually for my mother, for not controlling the children properly. There were good days, too. I don't want you to think it was all sadness. During harvest festivals, when the community gathered to celebrate the crop, there was music, food, and dancing. My father was gentler on those days, perhaps out of respect for the neighbors, perhaps because of the whiskey flowing freely. In those rare moments, he would even pick Lucy up, call her my little princess. and I almost believed he could be a father like others. It was around my 9th birthday when I began to notice the worst in my father. It wasn't just his difficult temper or heavy hands when he was angry. It was his look at Lucy, a look of contempt mixed with anger, as if her very existence deeply offended him. "Skinny little girl, nothing but an expense," he would mutter when he thought no one was listening. Lucy was 6 at the time, and her health seemed to worsen with each passing winter. She coughed until she was breathless, had fevers that came and went. Dr. Miller, the town doctor who would treat us as a favor when things got really bad, once said she needed expensive medicine, better nutrition, warmth, and special care. "I won't spend what I don't have on a weakness God sent," was my father's response. "If she's meant to go, she'll go. I won't break my back working to support someone who won't amount to anything in life." That's when my father's special treatments to toughen up Lucy began. When she coughed too much at night and kept everyone awake, he would take her to the tool shed, a cold, damp place at the back of our property. "You'll learn to control that cough," he would say. In the morning, we would find Lucy huddled in a corner, shivering with cold, her lips purple but not making a single sound. When she couldn't eat everything on her plate, and it was truly difficult as my sister had little appetite, she would miss the next meal. "Those who don't appreciate what they have on the table don't deserve more," he would say. My mother watched it all with that distant look I mentioned. Sometimes, secretly, she would bring a piece of bread or fruit to Lucy. Other times, she would simply turn away and continue her chores, as if nothing was happening. I, small and powerless, didn't understand why she didn't do more to protect my sister. Only many years later did I understand that she herself was broken inside, unable to protect even herself. And so went the years of my childhood in Millfield, divided between the school that gave me hope and the house that taught me fear. I grew strong, despite everything. Lucy, however, seemed to wilt like a little flower without enough water. With each passing year, the light in her eyes dimmed a little. Her smile appeared less frequently. Her voice became quieter. When I was 12 and Lucy 9, there was a particularly harsh winter. The frosts were so heavy they left everything white until almost midday. The north wind cut like a knife, and our wooden house seemed like paper against it. It was during that winter that I felt for the first time the real fear of losing my sister. During that winter of my 12th year, things at home started to get even worse. That year's harvest had been poor because of the early frosts, and my father had lost part of his job at the farm. He still worked there some days of the week, but the money wasn't the same. And when the money decreased, his mood crashed along with it. I remember the day I came home from school and found our little house quieter than normal. There wasn't the sound of my mother moving pots, nor Lucy's soft humming of those old songs our grandmother taught. A heavy silence, the kind that seems to foretell disaster. I found Lucy huddled under our bed, trembling. I don't know if from cold or fear. When she saw me, she put her little finger in front of her lips, asking for silence. "What's wrong, Lucy?" I whispered, crouching to see her better. "Dad came home early," she answered, so softly I could barely hear. "He said I'll have to work to help at home." My heart sank. Lucy could barely stand for long without coughing fits bringing her down. What kind of work did my father imagine she could do? The answer came the next morning, when he dragged Lucy from bed before the sun had risen. "From today on, you're coming to the farm with me. There's plenty of work there that even a useless girl like you can do." "But Dad," I tried to intervene, "Lucy doesn't have the strength for that. She can barely—" I didn't finish the sentence. One look from him was enough to silence me. That look that said everything without needing words, "Don't interfere or it will be worse." And so, from that day on, Lucy began leaving with my father for the farm, where she worked in the kitchen, peeling potatoes, washing dishes, carrying water buckets. She returned at the end of the day exhausted, her hands red with cuts, her breathing more difficult than ever. "How was it there, Lucy?" I would ask while helping her to lie down. "I'm helping the family, Janet," she would reply, with a weak smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Dad says I'm finally good for something." At night, I would hear her cough worsen, that dry sound that seemed to tear her chest. I would get up to wet a cloth in water and place it on her forehead when the fever rose. I begged my mother to call the doctor, but she just shook her head. "Your father said we don't have money for a doctor. Besides, it's just a strong cold. It will pass." But it wasn't just a cold, and it didn't pass. In the weeks that followed, I watched my little sister waste away like a plant without sun or water. Her skin, already fair, became almost transparent. You could see the blue veins at her temples. Her eyes, increasingly sunken, lost that sparkle that made everything seem magical. The cough worsened and sometimes came with a red stain on the handkerchief she used to cover her mouth. On a particularly cold night, when my father wasn't home, I gathered the courage to confront my mother. "Lucy is dying, Mom. Can't you see? We need to do something." My mother stopped what she was doing, remained motionless for what seemed like an eternity. Then, without turning to me, she said in a voice I had never heard before, a voice laden with an old sadness, "Some people are born just to suffer in this life, Janet. We can't do anything against the will of God, or your father's." Those words fell like stones on my child's heart. How could a mother speak that way about her own daughter? How could she accept all that without doing anything? It was the first time I felt anger toward my mother, anger mixed with a deep disappointment that never really left me. When Lucy turned 13, she could hardly go to the farm anymore. My father, instead of letting her rest, found a new way to make her useful. He started taking her to houses of rich families in Millfield, where she worked as a maid, washing, ironing, cooking, jobs too heavy for her fragile body. "Dr. Miller said she has weak lungs, Dad," I tried to explain once. He said she needs rest. "What she needs is to stop being a burden on this family," he replied, hitting the table so hard the plates jumped. "If she can't help, she's better off not being here at all." And in these houses where she went to work, Lucy faced new kinds of cruelty. It wasn't just the heavy work, it was the way they treated her. The sick girl, they called her, or the poor thing, but they didn't stop her from carrying heavy buckets or scrubbing floors on her knees. Some mistresses were kinder, giving her leftover food to bring home, or an old coat that no longer fit their children. But others, "Today, Mrs. Sullivan left me without lunch," Lucy told me once, her eyes filled with tears. "She said I broke an expensive plate and that its value would come out of my food." I boiled with anger, but what could I do? I was just a 15-year-old girl with no power in that world that seemed to turn only according to the will of adults, especially men. It was around this time that I met Thomas, the son of the store owner where we bought on credit when money was tight. A young man with kind eyes, a few years older than me, who always set aside a little package of cookies or a piece of fruit when he saw me coming. "It's for your little sister," he would say, putting the bundle in my bag without his father seeing. "My mother had weak lungs too. I know how it is." Thomas was the first to show me that not everyone in the world was cruel, that there were hands that extended to help, not to hurt. When I told him how things were at home, he listened attentively, without judging, without giving impossible advice to follow. He just listened, and sometimes that was all I needed, someone who truly heard. The winter Lucy turned 15, she could barely get out of bed. The cough had transformed into something horrible that came in attacks so strong they left her breathless, her face red, her eyes wide with terror. The effort to breathe was so great you could see her ribs moving under her almost transparent skin. "Dad, please," I begged one night, kneeling before him. "Lucy needs to go to the hospital in Springfield. She's dying." For the first time, I saw something in his eyes that could be mistaken for concern. It wasn't love, of that I'm certain, but perhaps fear of others' opinions, of being judged for what was happening right under his roof. "We'll wait until the weekend," he finally said. "If she doesn't improve, I'll take her." But the weekend was too far away. 3 days after that conversation, I woke in the middle of the night to a sound I'll never forget. A wet bubbling, like water boiling in a pot, coming from my sister's throat. I ran to her and saw the horror on her face, her lips already purplish, her hands clutching the sheets so tightly her knuckles were white. "Mom! Dad! Lucy is dying!" I screamed, desperate. My father appeared at the door, hair disheveled, eyes still blurred from sleep and whiskey. He looked at Lucy, who was thrashing in bed, fighting for every sip of air, and said the phrase that would haunt me for the rest of my life. "Let her be. If she's going to go, let her go quickly and stop bothering us." That night, I held my sister in my arms as life slowly left her. I sang our grandmother's songs, stroked her hair, told her I loved her more than anything in the world. I don't know if she heard me, but I want to believe she did. That in her final moments, she felt there was at least one person in this world to whom she truly mattered. When the sun rose, Lucy was no longer with us. Her small, fragile body had finally found the rest that life never allowed. The day that followed Lucy's death was a blur of disconnected images and sounds in my memory. I remember the strong smell of coffee in the kitchen, mixed with the sweet and strange aroma that came from our room where my sister's body lay waiting. I remember my father's voice, as harsh as always, giving orders. "Go call Mr. Jenkins from the funeral home. Tell him it's a simple thing, that we don't have money to spend." I moved like a ghost through the house, as if my body was there, but I myself had departed with my sister. My mother cleaned the house furiously, as if she wanted to erase any trace of Lucy. At one point, I saw her gathering my sister's few clothes in a bundle. "What are you doing?" I asked. "I'm going to give all this away. It's of no use here anymore," she replied, without looking at me. "But Mom, it's all that's left of her." "Better not to keep things from the dead, Janet. It brings bad luck." It was the first time I felt that I had not only lost my sister, but also any chance to preserve her memory in that house. It was as if they all wanted to pretend Lucy had never existed. The wake was simple, in our own bedroom. Lucy, dressed in the only good dress she had, a light blue one, faded from so many washes, seemed to be just sleeping. Her face, for the first time in a long time, showed no signs of suffering or fear. Some neighbors came, brought coffee and cornbread, prayed the rosary with us. The parish priest appeared briefly, gave a quick blessing. "Angel of the Lord," he called Lucy, and that gave me some comfort. At least someone saw my sister for what she really was, an angel who passed through this earth just in passing, without having truly known what human warmth was. Few bothered to go to the cemetery the next day. Besides our family, only Thomas, who stayed by my side the whole time, holding my hand when I thought I would collapse, and 2 or 3 closer neighbors. It was an overcast day, with a fine drizzle that made everything have a sad shine, as if the sky itself was crying what my mother could not cry. It was there, in front of that open grave, as Lucy's simple casket descended into the earth, that it happened. We were standing in silence, my father, my mother, and I, when I felt a movement beside me. My father approached, coming so close that I could smell his sour breath of morning whiskey. Then, in a whisper only I could hear, he said the words that would freeze my blood. "Now only you remain." It wasn't just what he said, but how he said it. There was something in his voice, a sinister promise, a thinly veiled threat that made me understand in an instant that Lucy's fate could very well be mine, that now, without my sister to absorb part of his anger, all of it would turn to me. In panic, I sought my mother's gaze. Always, since I was little, even knowing she did little to protect us, I still looked to her for some sign that there was an ally, someone who would understand my fear. Our eyes met for a second, and then something happened that broke the last thread of hope I still held. She laughed, a short, muffled, cynical laugh, and added, "At least this one is stronger. It will take longer to break her." At that moment, there in front of my sister's grave, I understood that I was alone. Completely alone between two people who saw my suffering not as something to avoid, but as something inevitable, or worse, something that gave them some perverse kind of satisfaction. The walk back home was the longest of my life. Each step took me back to the place that, I now knew with certainty, was no longer a home but a prison where I would be the next victim. Thomas tried to talk to me, to ask if I would be okay, if there was anything he could do, but I could barely respond. How to explain the horror I had just understood? How to tell someone that your own parents are eagerly awaiting your suffering? The days that followed confirmed my fears. With Lucy out of the way, my father concentrated on me all the cruelty that he had previously divided between the two of us. The difference was that it was no longer my supposed physical weakness that irritated him. It was my strength, my resistance that seemed to be a challenge for him. "These letters of yours won't do you any good," he would say, tearing up my school books. "What you need is to learn to be a real woman." Being a woman, in my father's view, meant serving without questioning, accepting any treatment without complaining, bending to men's will, first his, then a future husband's, whom, he made clear, he was already planning to find for me. "Nestor's son, that one who owns the store at the corner of the square, is looking for a wife. I've already told him you're available," he announced one day during dinner. "He's not a handsome young man, but he's got possessions. He'll take you off my hands." Nestor did have a son. A crooked man approaching 40, known in town for his violent temper and for mistreating stray animals. The idea of being handed over to him gave me nightmares for weeks. It was during this time that my mother also began to change. Not for the better, for worse. If before she was distant, now she seemed to have developed an active hostility toward me. She criticized everything I did, said I was acting smart, that I thought I was better than everyone, just because I could read and write well. "Your sister at least knew her place," she said once, while I was washing dishes. "You have that look that irritates me. It's like you're always judging me." And she was right. I did judge her. I judged her cowardice, her complicity in my father's cruelty, her failure to be the mother both Lucy and I needed. The difference was that, unlike Lucy, I didn't hide this judgment. It was there, in my eyes, in my posture, in my refusal to bow completely. Gradually, my life became a daily hell. I woke before dawn to do all the housework, went to the farm to replace the work that was once Lucy's, returned to finish the household chores, cook, clean, wash. There was no more time for school. My father forbade it, saying I had already learned too many letters. At night, locked in the little room I used to share with my sister, I felt Lucy's ghost beside me. It wasn't fear, it was comfort. Sometimes I would talk to her in whispers, telling her about my day, my worries, my impossible plans for escape. "I'll get out of here someday, Lucy," I would promise in the dark. "I'll find a way." But what way? I had no money, nowhere to go, no one who could really help me. Thomas, as kind as he was just a young man under his own father's authority. And in small country towns at that time, a father's word was law. Nobody interfered in family matters, even if those matters involved abuse and cruelty. As the months passed, I felt my spirit, once so strong, beginning to yield. It was as if a light inside me was diminishing, growing weaker each day. I began to wonder if my mother was right. Maybe it would be easier to accept, to bend, to stop fighting. Maybe the destiny of women like us was really this: to serve, to suffer, and eventually to disappear without leaving marks. On one particularly terrible night, when my father came home drunk and furious for having lost money gambling, he broke almost everything in the kitchen, beat my mother until she fainted, and then came after me. I managed to lock myself in the little room, pushing the dresser against the door, while he pounded on the wood outside. "You won't escape forever," he shouted. "Sooner or later, I'll teach you to have respect." Huddled in the corner of the room, praying the door would hold, I made a decision. If I stayed there, I would end up like Lucy, or worse, like my mother, a shadow of a person, empty inside. I had to find a way out, whatever it might be. The next morning, as I cleaned up the glass shards and dried blood on the kitchen floor, a knock at the front door startled me. We weren't expecting anyone, and visitors weren't common in our house. The people of the town, even without knowing exactly what happened inside, sensed something was wrong and kept their distance. I opened the door, fearful, and was faced with an elderly gentleman I had never seen before. He had white hair, a face wrinkled by time and sun, and eyes of such a clear blue they seemed almost transparent. Eyes that, I realized with a start, greatly resembled Lucy's. "Good morning, young lady," he said in a deep but gentle voice. "Is this the home of Edward Smith?" "Yes, it is," I replied to the white-haired gentleman, still holding the door ajar, wary. "My father isn't here. He left to work at the farm." "And your mother?" he asked, looking over my shoulder into the house. "She's lying down. She didn't feel well during the night," I answered, without going into details about what had really happened. The man nodded, an understanding look crossing his wrinkled face. "I see. My name is Gerald Prentice. I'm your maternal grandfather's brother, God rest his soul. I heard about your sister's death. Too late, unfortunately." I was paralyzed for a moment. A great-uncle? I had never heard of him. My mother rarely mentioned her family, and when she did, it was always vaguely, as if they were people from a past too distant to matter. "Would you let me in, my child? I'd like to pay my respects," he continued, gentle but firm. There was a natural authority in his voice that made me open the door without questioning. Great-uncle Gerald entered our simple house with a dignity that seemed out of place in that environment of misery and despair. He carried a small, worn leather suitcase and a hat he respectfully held in his hands. He sat in the chair I offered him, observing the environment with attentive eyes that seemed to absorb every detail. The broken dishes I hadn't finished collecting, the stains on the floor that my hasty cleaning couldn't completely disguise, the heavy air of a house where happiness hadn't existed for a long time. "I've come from Riverdale," he explained. "I only heard about the girl's death. What was her name again?" "Lucy," I answered, feeling the familiar pain tighten my chest. "My sister Lucy." "Lucy," he repeated with respect. "I only heard about her passing when I happened to meet an acquaintance from Millfield. I came as soon as I could, but the roads are difficult with all this rain." At that moment, I heard a noise coming from my parents' room. My mother had woken up. She appeared at the kitchen door, her face swollen, a dark bruise forming near her left eye. "Uncle Gerald," she said, her voice choked with surprise. "What are you doing here?" "Constance." He stood up, but didn't approach her. There was a deep sadness in his gaze. "I came too late for your little girl's funeral. I'm sorry." I saw something strange happen in my mother's face. For a brief moment, a genuine emotion, perhaps shame, perhaps remorse, seemed to cross her normally empty features. But it lasted only a second, soon replaced by the familiar mask of indifference. "You didn't need to bother," she said coldly. "It was just pneumonia. These things happen." Great-uncle Gerald didn't respond immediately. His eyes, so similar to Lucy's, fixed on my mother's bruised face, then passed to me, noticing the finger marks on my arms that I tried to hide by pulling down the sleeves of my dress. "I'll be staying in town for a few days," he finally announced. "If it's not too much trouble, I'd like to visit you again. It's been a long time since I've seen my great-niece." My mother looked uncomfortable, but couldn't refuse without seeming rude. "As you wish, uncle. But our house is simple. We don't have much to offer." "I don't need luxury, Constance. Just a little family company." When he said goodbye, promising to return the next day, I felt a strange mixture of hope and fear. There was something about that man, a dignity, a quiet strength, that made me feel he wasn't like the other people in town who pretended not to see what was happening in our house. But I also knew that his presence could enrage my father, and that never ended well for anyone. My fears were confirmed that very night. When we told my father about Great-Uncle Gerald's visit, he exploded. "Meddling old man! What's he coming for? To stick his nose where it's not wanted?" "None of that Prentice family is any good. They're all the same, full of heirs but without a penny to their name." My mother, as always, lowered her head and said nothing. I, however, couldn't contain myself. He just came to pay respects for Lucy. He's family. It was a mistake. My father turned to me like an enraged bull. "Family? The only family you have is me, and I'm sick and tired of your attitude. You think I didn't notice how you looked at me at that useless sister of yours' funeral? Like I was to blame for her being too weak to live." "Lucy wasn't weak," I shouted, completely losing my sense of danger. Something inside me had broken. Perhaps the last thread of fear that still controlled me. "She died because you mistreated her all her life, because you sent her to work when she was sick, because you let her go hungry as punishment, because you locked her in the shed in winter." The silence that followed was more frightening than any shout. My father looked at me with a hatred so pure it seemed to almost transform him into another person. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and trembling with contained rage. "Tomorrow, I'm going to speak with Nestor's son. You'll marry him next week, even if you have to be tied up, and if you open that mouth one more time, it'll be to eat your own teeth." That night, I locked myself in my room as usual, pushing the dresser against the door. But this time I knew it wasn't enough. The threat of forced marriage to Nestor's son wasn't a bluff. My father would do it, and I would be handed over to a man as cruel as him, or worse. Sitting on the bed I once shared with Lucy, I cried as I hadn't since the day of the funeral. They weren't tears of just fear or sadness. They were tears of an anger I had never allowed myself to fully feel. Anger for what they had done to my sister, for what they were trying to do to me, for all the years of silence and terror. "I won't let this happen, Lucy," I whispered to my sister's ghost, who seemed more present than ever. "I won't end up like you or like Mom. I'd rather die trying to escape." The next day, my father left early, determined to speak with Nestor and his son. My mother, still marked by the blows of the previous night, avoided looking at me. She was frantically tidying up the house, as she always did when she was nervous. "Why did you never run away?" I suddenly asked her while sweeping the living room floor. She stopped what she was doing, frozen for a moment, as if the question was a slap. "Run away to where, Janet?" she finally answered, her voice empty of emotion. "To go back to my father's house, which was the same or worse. To live on others' charity. A woman alone has nowhere to go in this world." "And you prefer to live like this? Being beaten, watching your daughters suffer?" "You don't understand," she said, and for an instant I saw a glimpse of the young woman she must have been once, before life broke her. "Some people are born to suffer. I am one of them. Your sister was another. I had hoped you would be different, but you see, in the end, we all fall into the same pit." Those words, instead of discouraging me, lit an even greater determination within me. I would not be like my mother. I would not accept that fate as inevitable. It was around noon when Great-Uncle Gerald appeared again, as promised. This time, with my father out of the house, I invited him in to sit. I offered what little we had, a thin coffee and some cornbread I had made that morning. The old gentleman sat down, observing the interaction between my mother and me. I don't know exactly what he saw, but his clear eyes seemed to see beyond appearances, beyond unspoken words, straight to the rotten heart of that house. "Constance," he said suddenly, his voice soft but firm. "Do you remember when you were a girl, before you married this man?" My mother, who had her back turned arranging something on the shelf, stopped. Her shoulders tensed. "Yes, I remember," she answered, without turning around. "I saw this same look on your face when you were a child," continued the great-uncle, now looking at me. "This same fear, this same resignation beginning to take over. I did nothing then. I didn't realize what was happening until it was too late, until you were already trapped in this marriage." He paused, as if carefully pondering his next words. "I won't make the same mistake twice," he concluded. The rest of that day passed in a strange calm, like the silence that precedes a great storm. My mother avoided looking directly at Great-Uncle Gerald, as if she was afraid of what she might see reflected in his eyes. As for me, I felt a confused mixture of hope and distrust. After all, in my 18 years of life, I had learned that kindness rarely came without a price. The great-uncle stayed until almost dusk, asking apparently casual questions about life in the house, how I spent my days, about my plans for the future. I answered cautiously, without revealing the complete horror of our situation, but something told me he already knew, or at least suspected, the truth behind our measured words. When he finally said goodbye, he took my hands in his, rough from a lifetime of work, but gentle in the way they held mine. "Janet, you have my mother's eyes," he said. "Eyes of someone who wasn't born to bow down." Then, in a movement so subtle I almost didn't notice, he slipped a small folded paper into the palm of my hand. Only after he left was I able to read the message written in that trembling elderly handwriting. "I will be at the corner by the church at midnight. Bring only the essentials. G." I read and reread those words, hardly believing what they meant. It was an offer of escape, a hand extended at the exact moment I needed it most. But distrust, a constant companion of those who live in fear, made me hesitate. What if it was a trap? What if my father had found out and planned all this to test me? My father's return, at dusk, dispelled any doubt I might have had. He entered the house triumphant, smelling of whiskey and satisfaction. "It's all arranged," he announced, throwing his hat on the table. "Sunday you'll marry Ben, Nestor's son. He agreed to pay a good dowry. Seems you're good for something after all." My mother, kneeling by the wood stove, merely nodded, as if we were talking about the weather or the harvest, not about my future being sold. "Dad," I tried one last time, in the calmest voice I could manage. "I don't want to marry Ben. He's old enough to be my father, and everyone knows he mistreats people." My father stared at me, and there was a satisfied cruelty in his eyes that chilled me inside. "You think you have a choice? You think anyone cares what you want? You'll marry him, and you'll be an obedient wife, or you'll regret having been born." At that moment, looking at that man who should protect me, but who had always been my greatest threat, I knew that Great-Uncle Gerald's note was my only chance. No matter the risk, anything would be better than the fate that awaited me as Ben's wife. During dinner, I kept my eyes lowered and answered only when necessary. I wanted to appear defeated, submissive, so as not to raise suspicions. Inside, however, my mind was working frantically, planning what to take, what clothes to wear, how to leave the house without making noise. When everyone retired, I stayed awake, lying in the darkness, counting the minutes. The clock in the living room marked 11 when I heard my father's heavy snoring coming from the next room. I waited a bit longer, just to be sure, then quietly got up. There was little to take: a few changes of clothes, an old photo showing me, Lucy, and my grandmother, the only good memory I kept, and the small mother-of-pearl brooch that had belonged to my sister. I wrapped everything in a large handkerchief, the kind of bundle that wouldn't draw attention if someone saw me leaving. I was about to open the back door when a shadow moved in the darkness of the kitchen. I stifled a scream, ready to run back to my room, when I recognized the familiar outline. "Mom?" Constance was standing there, a silhouette against the weak moonlight coming through the window. In her hands, a small package. "You're leaving," she said, not as a question, but as a statement. I froze, not knowing what to answer. If she told my father, everything would be lost. "Yes," I finally admitted. There was no point in lying. "I'm going with Great-Uncle Gerald." I expected anger, perhaps a threat to wake my father. Instead, she extended the small package to my hands. It's a little money, she explained, her voice almost a whisper. It's not much, but it will help at the beginning. And this was your grandmother's. In the package, besides a few crumpled bills, I found a thin gold chain with a small crucifix. Mom, I began, confused by this unexpected gesture. Why are you helping me? I thought. That I wanted you to suffer like me? She completed, and for the first time in years, I saw tears in her eyes. Maybe a part of me did want that. It's easier to believe we must all suffer than to admit I could have chosen differently. She came closer, touching my face with trembling fingers in a rare gesture of tenderness. When Uncle Gerald looked at me today, I saw in his eyes the girl I used to be, the girl who had dreams before becoming this. I don't want that for you, Janet. I never did. Come with me, I begged, holding her hands. We could both go. Great Uncle Gerald would help you too. She smiled sadly, shaking her head. It's too late for me, daughter. I wouldn't know how to live any other way anymore. But it's not too late for you. Go, and don't look back. Live the life I didn't have the courage to seek. We embraced briefly, an awkward embrace between two people who hardly recognized each other as mother and daughter after so many years of emotional distance. Then she herself opened the back door, checking if the path was clear. Quick now. Your father sleeps heavily, but you never know. With my heart beating like a drum, I slipped out of the house, the improvised bundle firm in my hands. The night air was cold, heavy with the smell of wet earth and grass. I followed through neighbors' backyards, avoiding the main streets, until I reached the small St. Sebastian's Church in the center of Millfield. As promised, Great Uncle Gerald was there, a solitary figure leaning against the wall. Seeing me, his wrinkled face broke into a smile of relief. You came, he said simply. I came, I replied, still uncertain of what awaited me, but certain that any future would be better than what I was leaving behind. He led me to a simple wagon waiting further ahead, its wheels already ready for the road, the horse grazing peacefully beside it. He helped me up and took the reins. Where are we going? I asked, as the wagon began to move, creaking slightly on the dirt road. To Riverdale, to my house. It's no palace, but there's plenty of room for a great niece. And from there, well, from there you can decide what you want to do with your life. Study, perhaps? You don't seem the type who was born to stand still. The wagon advanced slowly into the night, moving away from Millfield, taking me away from everything I knew. I should have been afraid, but instead I felt a strange peace. For the first time in many years, perhaps for the first time in my life, I was taking the reins of my own destiny. The journey to Riverdale took almost 2 days. We stopped only to rest the horse and to eat some of the simple food Great Uncle Gerald had prepared. During this time, he told me about himself, how he had lived his entire life in Riverdale, how he had been a teacher before retiring, how he had never married, but had a house full of books and a small orchard that was his pride. He also told me more about my mother, about how she was as a girl, cheerful and dreamy, until she married my father. Your grandfather wasn't much different from your father, he explained. Constance went from one hell to another, thinking she was escaping. When we finally arrived in Riverdale, I found a larger and busier town than Millfield. Great Uncle Gerald's house was on the outskirts, a simple but well-kept building with a flowering garden in front and an apple orchard in the back, exactly as he had described. Welcome to your new home, Janet, he said, helping me down from the wagon. For as long as you want to stay. In the weeks that followed, I adapted to my new life. Great Uncle Gerald, besides giving me shelter and food, insisted on introducing me to the local school principal. The girl is too intelligent to go without studying, he argued. So, at 18, I resumed the studies my father had forced me to abandon. It wasn't easy. I was older than the other students, had to study twice as hard to make up for lost time. But each book I opened, each new thing I learned, was like a small act of revenge against everything they had tried to deny me. The great uncle never asked much about what had happened in my parents' house. "The past is like a wound," he would say. "Sometimes the best way to heal is to leave it in peace, not to keep poking at it." But he was always willing to listen when I myself wanted to talk, without judgments, without trying to minimize what I had experienced. It was also he who encouraged me to work part-time at the town library. "You like books, and they need help organizing the collection. Seems like a good combination to me." He was right. At the library, I found not just a job, but a place where I felt useful, respected. The people there, Librarian Nancy, the regular readers, saw me as myself, not as Edward's daughter, not as the sister of the girl who died, just as Janet, the dedicated young woman who knew the books like the back of her hand and always had a reading suggestion on the tip of her tongue. It was at the library that I eventually reconnected with Thomas. He had moved to Riverdale after his father's death to work at the branch of the store that an uncle owned in town. Seeing me behind the checkout desk, his face lit up with a smile so genuine it made my cheeks blush. "Janet, I thought I'd never see you again. One day you just disappeared from Millfield. No one could say where you'd gone." After that, Thomas began to visit the library almost daily, even though he was a slow reader who took weeks to finish a single book. It wasn't long before everyone in town began to comment about the store clerk who was clearly in love with Professor Gerald's niece. Life, which before had seemed a burden too heavy to carry, gained new colors, new meanings. With the support of Great-Uncle Gerald, I managed to finish my studies and even take the normal course to become a teacher, the dream I had held since I was a girl. I never returned to Millfield. I learned from acquaintances who traveled between towns that my father had died a few years after my escape, a victim of the cirrhosis his daily whiskey finally caused. My mother, apparently, had moved to a cousin's house in Oakville, where she lived modestly, taking in laundry. I thought many times about looking for her, but something always held me back. Perhaps it was fear of awakening old wounds, or perhaps it was the memory of that last night when she herself had told me to go and not look back. I prefer to believe that, in her own way, that was the greatest gesture of love she could offer. Great-Uncle Gerald lived to be 92, lucid and active almost to the end. His last act of generosity was to leave me the small house in Riverdale, the place that had truly become my home. At his funeral, as I threw a handful of earth on the casket, I silently thanked the man who had risked everything to save a great niece he barely knew. "It was a miracle he appeared just when you needed him most," commented Thomas, who by that time was already my husband, holding my hand in the cemetery. But I knew it hadn't been any miracle. It had been the most basic human decency, that which recognizes another's suffering and decides not to stand idle. It was the courage of a man in seeing in the present the echo of the past and saying, "Not this time. This time will be different." Here I am, so many years later, back in Millfield. Who would have thought I would one day return to the town that was the scene of so much pain? But life has its twisting paths and sometimes leads us back to the beginning, perhaps to close circles, perhaps to show us how far we've come. I returned here almost 20 years ago, after Thomas passed away. We had built a good life in Riverdale, raised our 3 children, Martha, Edward, and Gerald. Yes, in honor of my Savior. All already grown and on their paths when I became a widow. Thomas departed peacefully, at home, holding my hand. A heart attack that came quickly, without prolonging suffering. I still miss him every day, especially when the smell of fresh coffee fills the kitchen in the morning. He loved being the first one up, just to prepare coffee the way I liked it. After his death, the house in Riverdale seemed too big, too empty. That's when Martha, my oldest daughter, suggested I move closer to her. She had settled here in Millfield, where her husband August coordinated the agricultural cooperative. They had a spacious house and 2 small children who, according to her, needed their grandma nearby. The decision wasn't easy. Coming back here meant facing ghosts I had left behind long ago. But it also meant being close to my grandchildren, helping them grow, being a constant presence in their lives, something I never had in my own childhood. So, I sold the house Great-Uncle Gerald had left me and bought this one where I live today. A simple but cozy little house with a porch where I can watch the sunset and a yard large enough for my garden of herbs and flowers. It's just 3 blocks from Martha's house, close enough to see my grandchildren almost every day, but with enough space to maintain my independence. In the first months after moving, I confess I walked tensely through the town streets, always expecting to encounter some face from the past, someone who might recognize me and bring up stories I preferred to leave buried. But I soon realized that Millfield had changed as much as I had. The few who might still remember the girl Janet, daughter of Foreman Edward, were now elderly, who barely remembered their own lunch from the previous day. Moreover, the town itself had grown, modernized. Where there were once only simple houses and dirt roads, now there were buildings, asphalt, new stores. The places that held my worst memories no longer existed. The house of my childhood had been demolished to make way for a small supermarket, and even the old cemetery where Lucy was buried had been moved to a more distant, more modern area. It was after a few years here that I discovered my passion for cooking. It started unpretentiously, preparing special dishes for my grandchildren's birthdays, Lucas and Mary. The children loved it, and soon neighbors started asking if I would take orders for parties and family gatherings. What was a pastime became a small source of income and, more importantly, of joy. I specialized in traditional dishes of the region, those I learned by watching my grandmother and that I later perfected with my own touches. My cider with cinnamon became a sort of local legend, especially in harsh winters when people line up at my door on weekends to take a bottle home. Today my days are filled with small joys that, added up, form a full life. I wake up early with the first rooster crow, more out of habit than necessity. I prepare my coffee, sit on the porch to watch the day break while I do my crochet, another passion I discovered late in life. I tend to my garden in the early morning hours when the sun is still gentle. 3 times a week, I give volunteer literacy classes for adults at the neighborhood association. I never stopped being a teacher, even after retiring. Seeing the sparkle in the eyes of a 60-year-old man or woman when they manage to read their first complete sentence is one of the greatest rewards life can offer. On Wednesdays and Fridays, I receive my grandchildren after school. Lucas, now 15, is quiet and studious like his grandfather Thomas. Mary, at 12, has my stubbornness and my taste for books. I sit with them at the kitchen table, help with lessons when I can, and then we prepare together some special recipe, usually sweets, which are their favorites. On Sundays, Martha's house fills with the whole family. My other children, Edward and Gerald, come from Springfield and Riverdale with their families, and we gather for a lunch that starts at noon and only ends when the sun is already low. On these days, I'm the one commanding the stove, preparing the dishes everyone eagerly awaits, the pot roast with mashed potatoes, the chili in the iron pot, and of course, my desserts, apple pie for the adults, chocolate pudding for the children. Sometimes, on the quietest nights, when the only sound is the chirping of crickets in the yard, I allow myself to think about Lucy. I imagine what her life would have been like if she had had the chance to live it. Would she have married? Would she have had children? Would she have been a doting aunt to mine? I'll never know the answers to these questions, of course, but I like to think that somehow she is present in the small joys of my daily life. In Mary's smile, which sometimes reminds me so much of hers. In the delicacy of some flowers in my garden. In the way the late afternoon light comes through the kitchen window, transforming the ordinary into extraordinary, exactly as she saw the world. Time hasn't completely erased the pain. I think certain wounds never fully heal, but it has taught me to live with it, to transform it into something that, if not beautiful, at least has meaning. My dear friends who have accompanied me this far on this journey of memories, some so painful, others so full of hope, I want to leave you with some words I carry in my heart, words that time and life have taught me, often in the hardest way. If you're living in a house where fear is greater than love, where words hurt more than silence, Know that this is not normal, it's not right, and mainly, it's not your fault. For a long time, I believed there was something wrong with me, that if I were different, quieter, more obedient, more invisible, perhaps my father wouldn't be so cruel, perhaps my mother would have more courage to defend us. But the truth I discovered is that the problem was never in me or my sister. The problem was in my father's heavy hands, in my mother's distant gaze, in the cycle of violence that began long before we were born and that, without help, would continue long after us. This cycle only breaks when someone, it could be yourself, or it could be a great uncle who suddenly appears, or a friend, a teacher, a neighbor, sees what is happening and says, "This has to stop." That's how it was for me. It was Great Uncle Gerald's attentive gaze that saved me. He saw the signs that everyone else pretended not to see. That's why I ask you who are watching, be attentive. Truly look at the people around you, at the children who suddenly become very quiet, at the teenagers who don't bring friends home, at the women with lowered gazes and excuses always ready for unexplained bruises. Sometimes it just takes a true look, a sincere question, an extended hand to change or save an entire life. And if you are the one suffering, remember, you deserve a life without fear. You deserve to wake up without that weight on your chest, that anxiety about what might happen today. No matter what they told you, no matter how many times they made you feel small or weak or unworthy, that's a lie. The biggest lie that exists. You know, when I was my granddaughter Mary's age, I thought my fate was sealed, that I would end up like my mother, or worse, like my sister Lucy. But here I am, 76 years later, sitting on the porch of my own house, surrounded by a family I built with love, not with fear. If I could go back in time and say something to that frightened girl, I would say, "Hold on, it will hurt, it will seem impossible at times, but one day you will be sitting in the sun, at peace, and all this will seem like a distant nightmare." That's what I wish for each of you who might be going through similar situations. That you find your path to the light, that you find people who extend their hand when you need it most, that you never lose hope that a different life is possible. And for all of you who have accompanied me this far, my special request. If you liked my story, if it touched your heart in some way, please click subscribe and activate that bell icon. This helps me continue sharing these life stories, reaching more people who might need to hear they are not alone in their struggles. Leave in the comments the word hope so I know who really followed until the end. Each subscription, each comment is like a warm hug I receive from you. Do this now. Don't wait another minute. Thank you for listening to this old lady. May God bless each of your paths.